I would like to say that I liked and still like Dorothy Wordsworth. She is and was a very cheerful creature and disposed to see the best of things and to see happiness everywhere, really.
Like Dorothy Wordsworth, I moved to the Lake District in my late 20s. And like Dorothy, in a lot of ways, I wasn't expecting to move to this place and to find myself amongst lakes and mountains and woodland. It was a very big change for me. And reading Dorothy's journal allowed me a way to see the landscape and to think about my relationship with the landscape and with the people in it in a different way. Dorothy's so good at not just describing the beautiful detail of the things that she sees, the trees, the birds, the mountains, the light. There's so much light in her writing, but also the people that she meets, and that sense of community in the Lake District as well really comes through in her writing, and I love that about it.
She was a great observer, and she observed the country as a place alive. The journal is not just a nature diary at any point. It is a nature diary in that she observes the seasons, she observes the climate, she observes the changes of the colour of leaves of plants, and she observes the liveliness of nature, that she sees nature as alive. They look at a birch tree as it moves in the wind, and it's had rain upon it and the sun is shining, and it's like a spirit of water.
I realised recently that one of my daily walks that I take here in Grasmere is actually a walk that William and Dorothy took a lot together, and they called it one of their favourite paths, and it goes up onto the White Moss Common here. But I've had the experience of going up there daily and seeing the same view that Dorothy sees and talks about in her journal, where you can see both Ryder Water and Grasmere at the same time. And it's really accessible for me as somebody with chronic pain and fatigue. I can get there really easily, really quickly, and it's really peaceful and a really beautiful place to just sit and think, which is exactly what Dorothy did hundreds of years ago. And it's really amazing to have that connection and to see that she describes that in her journal. And there's one night where she sits up there by moonlight, and she says that watching the moonlight up there made her feel like she was more than half a poet.
The respect for life extended in the Grasmere Journal beyond in the Alfoxden Journal earlier. It extended to people. It wasn't simply that the nature was alive, but the people who walked amongst it. And the people who walked amongst it were the poor, the people who were deprived of the ability to have a chaise or a carriage or a horse. But it was the poor, the beggars, the discharged soldiers, the old seamen, the old ragman. And as Dorothy had listened to the sounds of nature, she also was able to listen to the sounds of humanity. And so she does listen, and she sometimes gives a little money, a sixpence, halfpenny. She sometimes gives bread, but she always gives attention. And the attention, in many ways, is the greatest thing a person can give to another person. Her ability to listen and then to transfer into writing the feelings and the perceptions of what gives people value. And it's usually, well, they must have basic needs. The homelessness of today would appall Dorothy, but she knew it then. She knew people and met people who had nowhere to sleep that night. She met a woman her own age, 30, from Cockermouth, a child in Cockermouth, when I was. And she says of this woman whose husband has been shot in the war, I had a muslin gown like yours. And she was moved. Dorothy herself is moved by the dilemma of a woman who's lost everything. She has a little child she has to move around. Nowhere to sleep that night. She'd had nothing warm that day. Dorothy gives her bread and a shilling, 6pence more than I need have done, she says.
One of the other things that really appealed to me about Dorothy's journal is how she talks about her bodily health and that real sense of embodiment that comes through, along with the beautiful descriptions of the landscape and the details of her everyday life, because her bodily health was her everyday life. When I first moved to Grasmere, I was really ill, but I didn't know I was ill. I didn't have a diagnosis, but I really felt this great sense of sympathy and saw myself reflected in these descriptions he has of having to go to bed early, of suddenly getting tired, of having headaches, of having problems with her stomach, all these kind of details that I recognized in my own life as well. And later in her life, these become more acute for Dorothy and start to really impact on what she can do. And people don't often talk about that aspect of her life because I think it's a bit uncomfortable for some people. And we don't know really what happens to Dorothy after she is the Dorothy of the wild eyes who's walking great distances outdoors. What does she do? Who does she become? And what's her inner life like then? That's something I'm really interested in as a chronically ill person, what Dorothy's world can tell us about my world as well.
And so, the Grasmere Journal, with its attention to life, both the life of the skies and the moon and the sun and the stars and the earth with all its plants, but also the attention to the people who live amongst it and walk amongst it. And so, with the listening and the sympathy and the empathy, she just extends human love, really, because love is about understanding. And for all these reasons, it makes Dorothy Wordsworth very much a complete human being. Everybody, including me and including any reader now who reads Dorothy Wordsworth's journals, likes Dorothy Wordsworth.